think it's fair to say that no really serious analytical historian doubts the existence of Jesus. There's always rogue arguments, there's always, wild statements around any character. But I would say Jesus existed, absolutely. The evidence for that is certainly overwhelming, I would say. And also the impact of him on communities are picked up by Josephus from the Roman side, from Pliny in Asia Minor, talking about what to do with Christians and so on and so forth. So I think there being a Jesus and him doing stuff in Palestine, Middle Eastern area, in the early years of the first century is, I think, beyond question. The key is, what did he do? Did he do the stuff that other Christians claimed of him eventually? And was he the person they claimed him to be? So the crux is not was he there, but was he the person that Christians said he was and that they said he was? That's the core issue, really.
From my personal perspective, as I am a Christian, I would say yes, he did. And obviously then I would go further and say, and he was the Son of God. But obviously our book is not sold to a mainly Christian audience. It's for anyone who's interested. So whether he's a man, I think is undeniable who existed, but it's whether you take the next step. Was he really this Messiah? Was he the Son of God? Did he rise again? It's that extra step that is the element of debate, really.
I think Rome gave, the Pax Romana for a start. So it basically meant that huge areas of the Mediterranean basin were linked up. Trade, transport, communication, connectivity was so much easier. That's not to say it wouldn't have happened without Rome, but it is to say that I think Rome provided infrastructure and, as I say, cultural connectivity that made it easier for a new message to move around basically the Mediterranean basin. Also, I think Rome encouraged the spread of the Greek as the lingua franca, because obviously in the Eastern Mediterranean, Greek was the common speech. And I think the very fact the Romans took that on and that was acceptable in the Eastern Mediterranean, again meant that there was a common language that the Gospels could be written in. I mean, Jesus would have spoken Aramaic and would have known, Hebrew from the Scriptures, but of course the New Testament Scriptures, the letters from the word go, as far as we know, are written in Greek. And that's also part of this wider connectivity in the Eastern Mediterranean that allows you to have common language and so on and so forth. And I think that's very, very important. I also think lots going on in the Roman Empire in terms of exploration of Eastern religions, Egyptian religions and so on and so forth. So I think there's a receptivity there in the Roman Empire for new ideas. That's not to say that it's without risk, as Christians soon found that once they went beyond the bounds of Judaism, to not be giving sacrifice to Roman emperors was effectively, could be lethal under certain circumstances. But I think there was quite a lot of conversations going on about religion and different ideas and different beliefs. And I think that was part of the Roman milieu, not officially so, but that was one of the spin-offs of the kind of culture that had developed at the time. And that helped in the dissemination of Christianity.
Without that spread, without kind of it becoming the religion of the Roman Empire, I just don't think it would have had the kind of the power, the backing behind it to have spread so far. And with it kind of being the religion of the Roman Empire, people were kind of almost forced into kind of becoming Christian, and then later on maybe perhaps taking on for themselves, but otherwise it would have been very much reliant on the disciples and the contemporaries of Jesus at that time to then later on through word of mouth spread it. But I think the fact that it spread so far and wide, I think is vital.
I think the jury's out as to whether that's a good milestone in the history of the church or a problematic milestone in the history of the church. And obviously at any point there are going to be value judgments. So what I call a good milestone is not necessarily what the person sitting next to me is going to call a good milestone. In one hand, obviously it becoming the official religion assisted hugely in the dissemination of the gospel. On the other hand, it has implications. Once you become official, you have the arm of the state behind you, you become tied to secular power, people then join the faith because it's a career advancement. It changes something of the nature of Christianity. and taking my sort of writer's hat off and then putting my Christian's hat on, because the book's written for believers, non-believers, believers in other faiths, people who aren't sure. It's not a preachy book. But when I put my Christian's hat on, I sometimes worry a little bit that that's the point at which a radical, revolutionary, challenging sect becomes the orthodoxy, the persecuting, the powerful. You know, and I think, I'm not sure that Christianity was designed to be an official religion enforced by force.
They know none of God.
The books.
Your God has not yet proved himself more merciful than his predecessors.
They had their specific views, but they may have taken imagery that was already there at the time to therefore try and express these views that they had. So this idea of Jesus being the word, or logos, so logos is actually borrowed from the Greek, and from the Greek tradition, this idea of wisdom. So Jesus being God's wisdom, I think it can still be argued to be a uniquely Christian idea that Jesus was God's wisdom, but you are using terminology from other languages, from other cultures, to try and make it understandable to contemporaries of the time and to audiences, to try not to alienate other people.
There's a graffiti, first image of the crucifixion, about 8200, Palatine Hill, Alexamenos worships his god. It's rude, it's offensive, it's a donkey nailed to a cross. And what that illustrates is that a lot of people are thinking, you believe what? And I think Christianity is radical. The idea of a crucified God, a God who loves the world so much he sends his only son. I mean, obviously people are going to debate about whether they think that is what Christ said or whether that's what he was, but that's what Christians are claiming. That's radical stuff. Within 500 years, you're dealing with imperial Christ ruling in majesty. And I'm not critical of that. I'm just saying that one can then forget the radical roots of Christianity. Some people, for example, believe that the very fact that Christos, was a little bit similar to a Roman slave name, there was a similar word that was a different derivation, but it sounded like it, also meant that a number of Christians suffered from the kind of the prejudice of, oh yeah, you worship a God who's got a name like a slave, dies on a cross. Christos doesn't come from that derivation, but there is a slave name a little bit like it. And I think for a lot of people to start with, it was a radical lower class religion, and then it becomes the orthodoxy and its power and money and influence then. And I think, we've come a long way from a Roman gallows on the outside of Jerusalem.
Obviously, Islam has real issue with Jesus being claimed to be the Son of God, and also with the imagery that Christianity uses. So I think it's if you're talking about Islam in that sense, their problem is with the claims made for Christianity, but not actually with Jesus himself. They greatly respect Jesus. They think Jesus is so important. But their problem is they think Christians have taken it a step too far and said he is the kind of the Son of God. And other cultures, again, they seem to kind of have accepted Jesus up into a point and kind of absorbed him into their culture. So Hinduism, they accept him as a holy man, as a sadhu, and they even give him some imagery. And Buddhists, if they were to kind of have an image of Jesus within the Buddhist culture, Jesus is dressed in orange, like a Buddhist monk. So they accept it up to a point and kind of absorb him into their culture up until that point, so that Jesus is a point of contact. But it's that step further where it says he's the Son of God, he's the Messiah, he's something more, that then that similarity becomes the vast difference. So Jesus is a great similarity between Western and non-Western cultures, between Christianity and other religions. But he's also the divisive aspect that is totally different as well.
From the very beginning, Christ has been imagined in all sorts of different ways. We have a Viking Christ bound to a cross, not nailed to the cross. We have Anglo-Saxons talking about him like a warrior. We've got Egyptian Coptic Christians showing him beautifully brown-skinned and almond-eyed because the word became flesh, and they're saying, so flesh like my flesh. But clearly, for a lot of people in the 18th, 19th century, what they got as imperial power increased was they got very much a white Christ, very much an imperial Christ. So for many people, it's almost a semi-blonde haired Christ, or lightly brown hair with blue eyes. And I think one of the wonderful things that's happening at the moment, and it's been happening for about 20, 30 years, I think, in less economically developed countries, LEDCs, we're seeing people reclaiming him. I think C.S. Song wrote that unless people see Christ as one of themselves, Christianity will always be a stranger. And I think it's really exciting when you look at Balinese Christians depicting him descending like a dancer with a light driving the demons away. When you have Dalit Christians in India, untouchables, showing him as being one of us. He's one of us, he's an untouchable, you know, he's at the bottom of the pile. When you see other Indian Christians, for example, exploring the idea of Jesus with blue skin, because that's a sign of holiness, African Christians trying to express him in the language of heroic ancestors. I don't think in any way that dilutes what he's about. It shows that if people believe seriously that the Word became flesh, then it means that flesh here and now has to find a way of expressing him, understanding him, and approaching him so that he's not a stranger. And I think that's great that we're in a situation now where the white European imperial Christ is not the only view of Christ. It's not just that he looks Middle Eastern, like he really might have been a first century Jewish guy, but actually people are imagining him in their own culture, Chinese, Japanese, South American, and I think that's great. It's not brand new, it's obviously been going around for a while, but I find that exciting.
I want to be the Messiah.
Everyone has an opinion on him. Whatever you think, he's so divisive. And what's also, like C.S. Lewis said, he was either the Son of God or he was mad. So people just have such strong opinions, which I just find, as a Christian, I just find that fascinating. I just think, how did someone who lived over 2,000 years ago, why is he still causing debate? Why is he still causing people to discuss him? And I just think, I just encourage any conversation, because I just kind of think, well, you know, clearly he was someone who was different. Whether you think he was a son of God, whether you just think he was an intelligent man, whether you think he was a dangerous man, whether he was revolutionary, whether you think he was mad, clearly someone who needs some debate and who needs further conversation.